Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship by Venture for Canada. Venture for Canada is a national charity on a mission to foster the entrepreneurial skills and mindsets of young Canadians. Our vision is a Canada where young people can equitably realize their entrepreneurial potential to help build one of the most prosperous entrepreneurial ecosystems in the world.
In this inspiring episode, join award-winning social entrepreneur Jenn Harper, CEO and founder of Cheekbone Beauty Cosmetics Incorporated, as she discusses the transformative power of vulnerability in leadership. Delve into the journey of embracing one's own vulnerabilities to emerge as a more effective and empathetic leader. This episode offers a profound look at personal growth, emotional intelligence, and the strength that comes from vulnerability, making it a must listen for leaders, managers, and anyone looking to foster a more authentic leadership style. I am so excited to interviewing Jenn Harper from Cheekbone Beauty on Venture for Canada's podcast, A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Jenn, how are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing great and happy to be here. Thanks.
Jenn, I can think of few people who are better qualified to speak about the important topic of vulnerability in business. And thanks, by the way, for providing amazing keynote remarks at the Venture for Canada conference, All Things People, earlier this year. You spoke a lot about this important theme, about the importance of being vulnerable, of being authentic. To get things kicked off, Jenn, what does vulnerability mean to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this made me think about it. What does vulnerability mean to me? I think it means being my authentic self, and then with like a caveat of, you're always engaging with different humans and I'm, listen to my gut and is it the right time to share something? And so lots of self-awareness, I think, has to be involved when we're deciding we want to become more vulnerable. Because there is, I believe, such a thing as TMI, like just too much information. And the sad truth is, I think so many of us in society have all kinds of different traumas that we've experienced. And unfortunately, sometimes because of those things, then we don't have that understanding of when to share and not to share. And so it was only with lots of healing therapy, and just recognizing and becoming who I am and who I was supposed to be. But it took time. So it's not like on that journey on day one, I started telling people sort of all of the issues that I had had in my life and the things I was going through. So I think it's just being your authentic self, but again, with that caveat of an extreme amount of self awareness.
Can you share an example or examples of where you demonstrated vulnerability in the workplace?
Yeah. So early on in my career, I definitely did not. So I know what it doesn't look like. And that is just showing up in our places of work as the person you think that they want you to be. And I really look back now and recognize that we can't do our best work when we're not being ourselves. And so now, as the leader of our organization, I think it's really important to share, even we all have ups and downs in our everyday life. And despite appearances and what is put out on social media, the reality is that all of us have things going on that can cause our mood to change and can cause us to be struggling one day. And I think showing the team that that's okay is really important, especially in this day and age. I feel like after the pandemic, we really began to see that people would struggle and people were struggling and that they would continue to struggle and that we had to rethink about how we do show up in the workplace. And so I think being yourself with your team allows them to be a little bit more of themselves.
Can you think of any like specific kind of moment when you felt that you kind of shared this vulnerability, and can you reflect on the direct kind of impact that you think it had on your colleagues?
Yeah, so I think because publicly I've been quite open about my journey. And I think when someone is applying for a job at Cheekbone Beauty, they may already know that. And so what I've seen happen is even throughout the interview process, people are really open about themselves, which normally does not happen when an interview process is underway, we all see people showing up as this version of the person that we think this would suit that job that we're applying for. And so I think it's really interesting because of having a public platform and engaging in a lot of different networks in the community and within Canada. So people are well aware of my story. And so when they do show up to an interview, I've had some really, really powerful moments throughout that process where people are sharing stuff where normally you may have thought, wow, this is too much. And then I recognize, no, I think they're doing this because they know that I've been open. And then because sometimes it actually was a situation where when this happened, one of the first times I was like, whoa, like this is a job interview. I had my old mindset in play, but then I had, I thought about after and I'm like, I really love this person's personality. They had all the right skills. And then they got a little bit more personal, closer to, in parts of the interview. And then I thought about it and I'm like, no, like this is what we should do. They're telling me this is their situation and this is why they would like this job and how it in our jobs, we really don't have that thing or this concept of work-life balance. Like I think that's kind of a really interesting another conversation we could have another day. So our work life becomes part of our life. And so if you have a challenge and maybe you had children and you know that you have to one day of this week, and if you're in an interview and you can share that, like I think that's better. I feel like then we're already starting off in a better spot because we're already getting to know one another, who we really are.
Totally. And what you said about the kind of concept of work life balance, and in essence, how our work lives aren't completely compartmentalized and separate from our personal lives. Like we have one life.
Hmm.
And our work life permeates our personal life and vice versa, I think is really important. And one of the things we try to do at Venture for Canada is even within the context of a lot of our meetings is do these color check-ins at the beginning of meetings where people just, if they feel comfortable, share like, are they feeling green, which means that they're really like happy that day, or right, or if they're feeling like red, which means that okay, that's kind of like the traffic lights. Are they feeling in a not good headspace? And often it's because of things not even because of work. It might be because they're
Right.
cold or they have something going on with a family member. But I've often sometimes when I've felt somebody at work is like upset at me,
Hmm.
sometimes it's been maybe because something I've done, but a lot of the times it's been because of things that are completely out of my control and even out of the control of the organization. There are things going on in someone's personal life.
Hmm.
One question that I would love to dive deeper into is a little bit of like, what is that link between demonstrating vulnerability and creating trust with somebody? And I guess, Jen, can you describe what do you think results in that kind of causation?
Yeah, I think when someone does show up as their authentic self and they are displaying vulnerability, how we react to that is really critical. That's like a critical moment in relationship building, right? And that's, trust comes from these moments that we all get to share together, but it's usually over time. And so if someone does become really vulnerable and share something, I think it's our reaction in that moment. And for us as leaders, sometimes that does take training. And I learned something amazing from actually my husband, who's in a leadership role within his organization, was really just asking the individual, okay, am I right now, do you need me to help you solve something or am I just here to listen? Right. And I love that because then you're like, they're going to tell you exactly what you need to do. And that just proves how important communication is and all those other things that really matter within relationships. And I love using that line now with people at work because sometimes I'm like, and in my husband's situation, he is the type of person who's always felt if someone starts telling him something, he feels like he has to solve it. And that's generally not even ever the case because who are we to solve someone else's problems, right? So being able to just be the listener that they need in that moment. And like you just said, it may have absolutely nothing to do with us or the work or the organization. It is a completely outside problem, that they just maybe need to vent, but is impacting their day or their work life.
Yeah, and I love that line as well about asking somebody, "Do you want me to go into solutions, or do you want me to just listen?" Sometimes I've even practiced it with my partner where I've said, "Hey, by the way, I'm just venting. I don't want any
Yeah,
solutions."
that's awesome. When we get better at it, we get better at it, right?
Yeah, because it is, and sometimes it can be really frustrating when someone jumps to solutions when you don't
Yes.
want them.
Yeah.
Relatedly, psychological safety and vulnerability are often things that go hand in hand. At a high level, Jen, how would you define what is psychological safety?
Oh, yeah, that one, you know, I don't know if this is the perfect answer, but feeling secure enough within their role and the organization and the leaders within the organization that they would not be impacted in a negative way with regards to the organization should they share and have something happening that they'd be struggling with. That's really important. I think too, um, it goes back to that work and home life, and it's really all intertwined. And we know that mental health issues are clearly on the rise. The science, the data is telling us that, and I think we can all feel it within our own circles, with more and more people struggling mentally. And so that would be something where, again, are you feeling safe enough to share or to express that you could be psychologically struggling with something, right?
This is a somewhat more meta or broad question, but why do you think that people are struggling more? Why do you think that rates of mental health issues are on the rise?
I, my goodness, I feel like there's so many reasons. Uh, and I think that this information has come to the forefront after the pandemic for us. And I think because of that, like halt in life, did we all have time to stop and go, oh, I don't like any of these things that are happening. Like, I don't like my job. I don't like the people I'm living with. I don't like, and why is that? And did we all have time to like do a massive wellness check? Right? And then sometimes when I've learned that in the messiest moments of transformation or healing, they kind of happen at the beginning or in the middle, right? Like they're when you're slowly starting to unpack all the things and did that happen? And in then there's the other side of not only that pandemic happening and then our young people growing up in a totally different world. I don't know your age, and I know I won't ask, but I know for me and my generation, we did not have social media, and how I- if I was trying to think about this because I have children that are using these platforms regularly, as well as my like someone had said something, I don't know the numbers, but I've never seen a picture of myself the way my children see pictures of themselves because of the whole selfie thing. And I was just reading something surrounding that and I'm like, "Oh my goodness, like that isn't who would look at themselves that much, right?" And this is what so I feel like it's just affecting people on multiple levels and could that be playing a big role in mental health and we see all of these big lives happening and if we're not doing that, of course the comparison and jealousy things are so dangerous and so damaging. Like we all live our own very best lives in our own little circles, but unfortunately, because of platforms that we're feeling a lot of inadequacies, and not only with appearance, but I think lifestyle and jobs and schools and just like the list could go on. I mean, then there's the whole amazing world of just having the internet and how information is at our fingertips. But I don't know, again, I recently read something and it makes a lot of sense because you hear people speak and there's so much misinformation. Like we have all of this information right there, but in many cases, because of the access to put information on the internet from people that actually maybe aren't qualified to do so, the amount of misinformation that spreads and things that we believe or like so there's a lot. I think I probably could go on with more on a list of why. I think it's happening.
Yeah, I think those are all great like theses. I think the for that I think explain a lot of the reasons why there are so many more mental health challenges. One thing I was thinking about a little bit on the weekend was the extent to which the high levels of uncertainty like in our time, in the sense that like the world is changing like faster at a faster pace than it ever has in like human history, in terms of the adoption of new technologies, but also just in many ways like the ways of like living, like
Hmm.
everything from social media to like the rise of artificial intelligence, like electric vehicles, the list kind of like goes on. And when you think of like over human history over tens of thousands of years, like most of our like ancestors lived like their lives weren't that different from like their parents' lives or their grandparents' lives, kind of etc. And I wonder the extent to which to sometimes like our brains aren't like wired to like live in an era of so much kind of change. And if that, do you think that that's potentially
Oh,
something?
yeah, that's on the list. Climate. Like when I think of the internet, what was included in that is also like the doom and gloom of the state of things that are happening. So I can imagine the anxiety and that would cause, right? Which then brings on mental health struggles. Like anxiety is a mental health concern. So we have like the list. Yeah, that's absolutely uncertainty should is a category in itself.
With climate change being a particularly big contributor to that, particularly in this summer in Canada, which I think has been a wake up call for a lot of people, where there've been so many extreme weather events
Mhm.
across the country, or even the recent news in Hawaii, and obviously
Oh,
not part of Canada.
yeah, but so tragic. And when then you dive into the reason why, like Hawaii was the wetlands and water diverted by humans because they wanted to put hotels and tourism and all those kinds of things. And it's how it's I constantly say this at a lot of events where I've spoke that it's just humans, we really mess everything up. And we certainly have if you look at what's happening on Maui right now for sure, and Oahu.
Yeah, it's so tragic. The fires and just how quickly that they went
Yeah.
as well. Like the fact that it was hurricane force winds and just the level of damage, very
And
tragic.
if you even take like a deep I know because I've obviously connected with indigenous different communities and businesses and their perspective is really holistic. Like let's just let this land heal, like let's move and you they're asking the indigenous communities of Hawaii people not to visit right now. And then I'm empathizing with people who've already bought tickets and have hotels booked and um, there's like no refund policies from these organizations to offer these people that really want to pay attention and listen and just let the land heal itself, right? But unfortunately, it's like commercialism is like, no, you booked your vacation, you must come.
Yeah, it's a
It's tragic.
it is super tragic in reading the stories. Back to the kind of topic of vulnerability, although that was a very fun detour, and I think that the broader mental health challenges that exist in society right now, in part why it's so important for there to be workplaces and other kinds of spaces where vulnerability is accepted, because being vulnerable, being authentic is an integral part of or contributes to, I think, positive mental health. One other benefit of vulnerability that I read in researching this interview was that vulnerable people who are comfortable expressing vulnerability are often thought to also be more comfortable taking creative risks. And my question for you, Jen, is why do you think that that is the case?
Well, there would definitely be a role of, I guess, confidence in yourself, if you're willing to do that and not really afraid too much of what would be thought of by you or by people or people you don't know when you actually do become a little bit more vulnerable. And that then comes with a gained level of confidence, which happens when you really know who you are, you aren't overly concerned with what someone might think that you don't know, right? Maybe perhaps our family, our friends, it's going to be a little bit more sensitive and you are going to be concerned to some degree. But overall, when you're not overly worried about, what this person may or may not think about how vulnerable you've become, or this, I guess, the creative risks that you're willing to take, which could be in parts, entrepreneurship is a risk in many ways, right? And different steps we take as entrepreneurs can be really risky, especially when you're start to make financial moves that could impact you in a negative way should it not pan out as planned or forecasted. And so I think though that comes with a level of confidence and understanding who you are and what you believe in and the thing that you're working on, that you're so passionate about it that you feel the world deserves to see this. And so I think it's that gained level of understanding of who you are.
I recently finished reading this book called The Myth of Normal by Gabor
Mm.
Mate. Have you read this book? Or
I just bought it.
it's an excellent book. I don't necessarily
It's
agree with
very
all.
big.
It took me a long time. I read the Kindle version, so I don't know the actual physical size of the book, but it took me a long time to read. There's like 30 chapters, and the book covers a really wide range of topics, everything from more of the science around mental health to like the much broader social issues that are facing all of us in society today and how those contribute to mental health issues. A lot of his writing actually relates a lot to our previous conversation. But one of the things he talks about is he theorizes that the reason why a lot of folks have mental health challenges today is because like childhood and a lot of parenting and also just like social pressure teaches a lot of people to like hide their authentic self, and that this can be exhausting because if
Mhm.
you're always trying to present yourself to the public in a way that is not actually matching who you are as like a person, that causes just constant fatigue and anxiety. And it'd be like if you're an actor, except you're acting 24/7,
Mhm.
365 days a year. So one question I have for you, Jen, is how do you think somebody can tap into that kind of inner authenticity? And maybe to make the question a little bit more specific is like, I think one of the challenges that holds a lot of people back is that fear of being judged, that fear of that if they are their authentic self, then people won't like them. And Mate talks a little bit about this, is that everybody wants both authenticity, but they also want attachment in the sense
They
of they
wanna
want
be
to be,
liked.
yeah,
Yeah.
they want to be like, and that attachment and authenticity are often kind of fighting with each other. And that when
Mhm.
attachment is too strong, it pushes somebody to hide, or when someone feels that authenticity doesn't match with attachment, then they hide their authentic self. So my question to you is: let's say there's a listener who is listening into this, and they feel this tension. They feel they can't be authentic because it will limit their ability to create positive attachments with other people. What advice would
Mhm.
you have for them?
Wow. Okay. So this one's really big because when I was, working all of this stuff out for myself, I really learned something interesting that as a younger woman, I really needed that attachment. Like that was what was making me feel, I think, like I belonged, like I was valued. And you're right. You're not being your authentic self because you're more concerned about the attachment side of the situation. But an interesting part in, once I got well and started on this journey, there was a moment where I thought to myself, and it was like, I spent a lot of time walking in nature, and had a moment where I was like, I would be, as much as never do I want this to happen. I'm completely happy in my family life with my husband and my children. But I thought about it. I'm like, if I lost everything, I would be okay. And it was just like this aha moment of like, it's amazing how when you learn to love yourself, then you would be okay all on your own, right? And it just took a moment for that to happen. And not that I ever want that to happen, nor do I ever want to do anything to make that happen. But that was a moment when I felt it to be very, very powerful. Like I would be okay to be all alone.
What
And
you
I
said,
don't have the advice because I don't know how
yeah.
I got there, except just constantly when I talk about this healing journey, this 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 transformation that happened in my life, that was a journey. I'm still on it. And these are then now moments or milestones, I guess, to have along that way, right? And that never, like, I think I was, oh my goodness, 40, 42 when this happened. So almost half your life. And then, and I hope now when I talk to young people, I'm like, that's the most important. And it's not because we're really taught, again, that narrative of money is bad. You're taught it's so selfish to be that way. But this is not my 20-year-old saying that, where I'm the best, look at me, right? Because when I'm 20, that's, I didn't really feel that way, even though I could possibly be vocalizing that even into my 30s, maybe have that attitude of like, I don't need anyone, I can do anything, right? But that is in fact not true. You're so insecure. You feel like you need anyone to like live. You can't do anything on your own, but you would never vocalize that. Whereas in my 40s, I was like, wow, this is real. This is it. And it, on this journey, my focus on thinking about supporting other people. And I've given this advice that the best way to heal is figure out how you can do some things for other people. And, in 12 step programs, they do talk about that quite often, but it is really part of the most powerful thing in a healing space, or whatever we want to call it, journey. It's just recognizing that life is really about that great feeling you get when you are supporting other people however you can.
There's that famous quote, and I forget who said this, but in essence, that if you want to lose yourself, like, or in essence, like, kind of gain a greater appreciation, I think, for the broader world, it's through helping other people. And I think that rings completely true, and it is an important part of, I think, many people's healing journeys. And what you said earlier too really resonated to me about that importance of also, I think, being ambitious in life, but also being okay that, yes, at what you could lose everything at any point. And
Mhm.
that almost like Buddhist philosophy of like detachment is an interesting thing, which I kind of, in some ways, that there was some, I've been reading a little bit about more recently. And during the pandemic, when I was having some mental health challenges, I remember just I was so stressed and anxious about a bunch of things. And I remember just laying in my bed. It was like a February afternoon, and there was like sunlight, and I just was like, I had a sort of similar situation where, oh yeah, I was like, what if all those my horrible fears like came true? And then I just let the fears come in and out of my head, and I felt so
Mhm.
much better versus like that constant resisting. This is to say, do sometimes those fears come back and cause a lot of headache? Yes, so I'm not definitely I can still have my challenges, but I think that sometimes like the accepting that, yes, all those things could happen, and you know what, that is, so is life. That it can be a very calming thought, oddly.
Very. And I heard someone put it this way as well, that it doesn't always have to be an and, it can be an or sorry, it doesn't always have to be or, it can be and. And which helped me recognize this is when we're dealing in our day-to-day lives and say something really bad happens. Say somebody loses someone in death, say someone that's struggling in your family, and there's a situation that I'm personally thinking of for myself where this is so painful what's going on. And then there's another side of your life where people need you to be joyous and happy. But then I've recognized that that's not wrong, that that's okay. You can do that. You can be both at the same time. You can be really sad and upset and anxious and scared, but you can also be really happy and have joy. And it took me a long time to get there as well. And that is a new milestone or moment of recognition that happened most recently where, yeah, I don't have, okay, I feel, because when those negative experiences are happening, I almost felt like I am expected to be down and sad, and like that's how you should act, because that's again going back to that unauthentic self, how society has make us feel when something bad is happening. But I don't want to be sad and upset all the time, and then there are people that need you to be joyful and happy, right?
Yeah, and that you can feel those two different things at the same time. And I think of a lot of like like the reframing of funerals to like celebrations of life, right? Like in the sense that
Hmm.
like often a funeral,
I
someone
love
can be,
that.
yeah, you feel that celebrating of the life that was lived, but also the sadness of the person no longer being alive on earth. So And you can feel those two things at the same time. Shifting back to the kind of vulnerability in the workplace, one question that I have for you, Jenn, is if there's a leader or a manager listening to this interview and they're thinking, okay, I'm sold. Vulnerability is something that I want to foster more in the workplace, but they don't know where to start. What advice would you have for this person on how to create a culture where vulnerability is more welcomed?
Well, I am not the expert. I will admit that I learned everything that I now know about vulnerability from the incredible Brene Brown. And her materials and works have been a big part of my my story and my path. And so I highly recommend I can't even remember the title of the first book, but I think it was the one where she starts talking about vulnerability. And then there's a famous TED talk, and I think it's like 20 minutes. But listening to how she puts it, I was like, okay, I'm sold. And where she talks about that this isn't like has to be this overly dramatic thing that we do. It's going to be something that we practice. And we all know with practice, all of those skills and new skills take time. And so giving ourselves grace as we're working on this, but your your teams and the people that you surround yourself with at in life will see a difference. I can guarantee that, and it is only positive. Like there's been no I have no negative situations to share or express about just becoming a more vulnerable human. Only the most incredible relationships with people that I would never have known in any sort of past part of my life. But now, at your event, at any event where I am sharing, or even, smaller places where perhaps I'm not even the keynote, but get to meet someone and you're in those experiences and you have this engaging conversation and it's just so authentic and it's a real human connection, just so unique and special. And when you let all of those walls down, that's when those beautiful moments will start to happen.
When you were speaking, I was reflecting on what are the conversations that form like bedrock strong relationships, and it's not necessarily, or it's not talking about the weather or kind of more trivial things. It is having heart to heart, being candid, being authentic, being vulnerable. And I think to your point that especially in a world that is increasingly devoid of like human connection and strong relationships, a lot of the key of how we build back those kind of relationships, which are so integral to community health, to individual health, to social, to national, to community health, is through rebuilding relationships. And in some ways,
Hmm.
it's through reconnecting with our vulnerability and authenticity.
Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier in the interview, Jenn, about how vulnerability can have a downside, that there is a line between too much information, and that sometimes in the pursuit of trying to be vulnerable, one can actually traumatize or maybe cross a boundary with the person who they're interacting with. What's your advice on how to balance being vulnerable with also not going too far on the too much information TMI side?
I personally have found that that's where like questions become such a like and kinds of questions that you really truly want to get to know someone. So like those kind of questions where it's not a yes or no answer and the person you're speaking with has to go a little bit deep. And then it's almost like how much they share with you, then you can recognize how much you can share back with them. And then if there was a situation where you or someone else, shared and it felt uncomfortable, I think that's part of the practice. But I mean, just I think beware and be ready and the more the stronger you become and recognize and are able to accept criticism too. Like if someone said, whoa, like that was, and not be offended by those kinds of things too. So it's like it's practice. I'm just gonna say practice because it's gonna take practice. None of it is absolutely perfect. But I think questions are really powerful. And then that whole idea of intention of like when you meet someone or when you're engaging with a colleague, okay, what is my real intention here? When we're honest with ourselves, so it goes back to self-awareness, what we want out of something, or if we're trying to help somebody, like if we have that intention and we vocally, or mentally made note of this and or document it. Even like sometimes we're prepping for meetings and like we're like, what's the objective? Like it's almost that same idea, but even doing it with meeting someone new, and if you're trying to get them to be a little bit more vulnerable. And I know as leaders it's probably, and the ones of us that have practiced this, we do want our team to be a little bit more vulnerable because there's a lot of people out there, sometimes they're not at all, and so that's tough, right? So I love questions with good intentions.
And when I hear the questions with good intentions, I also think about boundaries and the importance of
Yes.
somebody who's maybe a recipient to vulnerability being clear on what their boundaries are, to say maybe there's a certain topic that's more off limits for that person because it's just too triggering because of past life
Hmm.
experiences, or everyone just has different levels of personal comfort. So I think that then what I heard from you is that there's also that onus on the person who is, I guess, receiving the vulnerability, to not be afraid to express what are their different boundaries.
Absolutely.
Jenn, this has been such a fun conversation, and I've learned a lot and reflecting on the importance of vulnerability and authenticity in the workplace. Do you have any closing thoughts or ideas that you haven't kind of shared maybe before that you might think it might be helpful to end this interview on, and for our listeners to reflect on?
Yeah, I think I'll just reiterate the sort of the magic that happens when we begin to practice this, and the depth of our relationships and the new connections. I think, our lives are sometimes those moments of like, I'm grew up in the 90s, so like sliding doors, and we get to decide. And this even happens and how much you get to engage with a fellow human being, right? And I have always been like the type of person who did never overshared. Yes, hello, like very simple, but my life has so much more meaning now. And the the relationships that I have with people are so much bigger and better than I possibly could have ever imagined because of vulnerability.
Jen, that is the perfect words to end off this interview. Thank you so much for being a guest on A New Wave of Entrepreneurship.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our socials and through our email list. And be sure to subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss our next episode. Have feedback on today's episode? Let us know directly in the app. Thanks again for listening and for joining the new wave of entrepreneurs. Till next time.